Hi, my name is Tanya Thompson. I'm a business development coach and I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington. I specialize in team building, facilitation, executive development. I love my job because I love helping people get clear on where they want to go and helping them to add skills or remove blocks to help them get there effectively. And today what I'd like to talk about is managing conflict. Look at what causes conflict, our styles when we're in conflict, and a couple of tips on how to manage ourselves in conflict. So, the stresses and strains of change on the human make learning more difficult. Okay, so one of the challenges when we're in times of change is that our human system gets strained. When we're strained, our curiosity, our resourcefulness, and our learning often goes down. And when that happens, oftentimes conflict comes up. So when I've asked groups in the past, think about conflict. When you think about conflict, that's like what? That's like what? Like a metaphor. To think about what's a metaphor for conflict for you. And when I ask groups that, I will hear a variety of responses. Sometimes I've heard people say it's like white water rafting, or conflict. Conflict is like a wall. Conflict is like a tennis match. Conflict is fun. Some people say that conflict is like a chess game. And sometimes conflict feels like it's going to be a storm coming. So what is it that creates conflict? This picture of an iceberg, because I would say that there are two aspects that really become apparent in conflict. And one is the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg are the behaviors that we see. The actions. Perfect. So there are behaviors and actions, conversations that we have that we see that's like the tip of the iceberg. But underneath the conflict that's happening and the behaviors, the actions, and the conversation, there is a whole lot that's happening underneath the iceberg. So when it comes to conflict, what are some of the things that lead us to conflict that we aren't even seeing, that we may not see in each other? Good. So some of the things that I often hear are our beliefs, our culture, our expectations. You're coming up with your own ideas about all of these things that are happening underneath the waterline that are affecting what we're doing, what we're saying, and how we are being with each other. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about under that water line, and this is what kind of gets interesting because the stuff that we can't see. There are our drives, and we all understand physically what a drive might be. It's that pull forward for a desire for something. So we have the drive to attain something, and it's this motion inside for us to move forward. Now there's something that's called a drive reduction, which means that when we have a drive and then we have a lack of something, it gets us into action. And when we're not getting that, it can create then conflict. So now arousal, that's a great word, but people, if they're overstimulated or understimulated, can create this discord inside that leads towards conflict. I love this word, homeostasis. So again, human beings, like everything in nature, is seeking balance. And when we are out of balance, either we are too hungry, we're tired, there's an emotional something that's out of balance, or there's something out of balance in the system, externally, in our system, in our workplace, that's going to lead to discord, again, either inside the person and often externally, that can lead to conflict. When we have expectations of a certain payoff, it's called a cognitive motivation. When that's not being met, or when our expectations our expectations are set here and we don't meet our expectations, again, we're going to have discord, something that is out of balance between different parts in ourselves or different parts that needs to be met. Okay, so you've got affiliation, they want to belong. Achievement, they want to feel that they're getting something, getting somewhere. Acknowledgement, they want to have kudos from the external world. Power, they need to want to have control over, and they want to see their influence in the world. For some people, these are things that are important. Being able to be self-determined oftentimes is a place where people get stuck, or they feel held back, or there's a discord in the amount of self-determination that they have within the workplace. Autonomy, being able to make decisions, competence, being seen for what they're able to do, and relatedness. So again, that goes back to belonging. All right, so underneath the waterline, there are, in addition to our culture, our beliefs, our biases, our associations, there's also our needs and our desires and our wants. And again, when those things are out of balance or not being met, under stress, it's likely that we will then lead towards conflict. Good. So now we know a little bit about what's going on underneath the waterline when there is conflict bubbling up. That there are needs and desires that may or may not be met. Now we're going to talk about your style and their style and how that may be a match or a mismatch when we're dealing with conflict in the workplace. So for those of you that have worked with me before, you will have already filled out a survey, so you'll see these style numbers and names come up, and you'll be able to then refer back to them in your manual. So let's talk about some of the common ways that conflict is expressed. So I like to look at it on a horizontal and a vertical axis. Horizontal axis, we will write down, this is the courage aspect. And on the vertical, we're going to write down consideration. Good. All right. So last but not least, let's talk about the collaborator, the win-win, the 9-9. How do you get there? So all of these have something in common. Down below here, there's a -1 in some place, and sometimes it's a -2. If it's a lose-leave, then it's just we're both out of here. There's always something that you're losing. You're either what a person is losing, or I'm losing a piece of my task, what's important to me to create, or I'm losing a relationship. Win-win is about looking for how can we both balance the consideration of each other and have the courage to meet our goals in the way that we want to have them met. So we can have a highly integrous bridge that's built, that the product is awesome, and we're maintaining our relationships all the way through that process. That's the win-win. Now, granted, there's times when the win-win is not most effective because it takes a high level of trust in the team. If there isn't trust, we're not going to get everything out on the table. What's under the waterline is going to stay under the waterline. And sometimes this takes time, especially if the team is not fully in a place of inclusiveness and trust. It's going to take a lot of time, in which case other conflict styles are going to be just more effective. My goal for you for us is to build a team that's going to be able to really step into this, because when we're here, we are in a place of innovation, collaboration, synergy, and you're really getting the maximum effectiveness, bang for your buck from your employees and from each other. It's an exciting place to be. Good. Considerations to think about is, what is the impact of knowing your conflict styles? Would you use each of the 5 conflict strategies? And how does understanding your conflict strategies help your organization? I'm going to let you think about that.
To summarize,
Get curious about what's happening under that waterline. What's important to them? What are their values? What are their motivations? What are their needs? And how can we help each other to meet those needs so we can maximize our team? So I'd like to leave you with a story. It's called The 17 Camels. So there were 3 sons whose father had just died. They were living in the Sahara Desert. They were nomadic, and the father had left his 3 sons 17 camels. Now, for the first son, he was going to get half the camels. The second son was going to get a third of the camels, and the third son was going to get a ninth of the camels. Well, they had 17 camels. And 17 does not divide by 2, nor does it divide by 3, and nor does it divide by 9. So they were stuck. They didn't really know what to do. And then one of them thought, okay, well, why don't we ask the wise old woman in our tribe? So they went to the wise woman and they asked her, we've got this dilemma. We have 17 camels, and they don't divide by 2 or 3 or 9, and we don't know what to do. And the old woman kind of scratched her head and said, well, I don't have a solution to your problem, but I have something to offer you. I have a camel. Why don't you take my camel? So then they had 18 camels. And it was interesting because they could divide 18 by 2, and the first son got 9 camels. They could divide 18 by 3, and the second son would get 6 camels. And they could divide 18 by 9, and the third son would get 2 camels. And if you take 9 and 6 and 2, that's 17 camels. So they had 1 left over, and they returned the 18th camel to the wise old woman. So my hope for you is when managing conflict in your organization that you're able to get curious and find your 18th camel. It was a pleasure talking to you.